Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Creatively Free. I'm your host, arielgrace. And today I have the pleasure of having Eryc Eyl, and he is a speaker, consultant on making work human, which has been most of my career as well, and also a creative in many realms, including DJ and storyteller and all sorts of playwright. So welcome, Eryc.
Thanks, Ariel. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to just start really broadly hearing about how your creativity has shown up in your life.
Yeah, it's one of those things I feel like you can't run away from, and I've tried to run away from. I think I was as a child I really identified as a creative, and then as an adult, sort of post college, I was like, no, I'm a serious professional, and somehow those things are not the same, can't be the same. So I spent some time just being like, that's not who I am. And it's only been in the past, I would say 15 years or so of my life that I've sort of integrated creativity into my life. I've always been creative about my appearance. That's always been a thing that I've done, and like in really weird ways. I mean, like in 5th grade, I remember going to school with a nylon neon pink belt across my body like a sash. When I was 11, I used to go to the barbershop, or not barbershop, like salon in my little town, and just tell them to do whatever they wanted to do with my hair. And they did some really awesome things and some really, regrettable things. But I was always interested in that, always interested in just showing up differently physically. But I think what's been interesting for me is navigating, and I think you can relate to this, is success in a corporate context and fulfillment and degrees of success as a creative as well, and not feeling like those had to be somehow kept separate, and really being miserable when I tried to keep those things separate, which I think is a lesson for all of us. But yeah, so I think now it's, like speaking is the primary thing that I do, and I do a fair amount of speaking, and for corporate audiences largely, and I really try to emphasize the things that I do that are not about that at all. Like you mentioned DJing, and I've written exactly one play, so I call myself a playwright. But embracing those aspects and saying that you can be more than one thing is a big part of it for me.
Yeah. I've been doing that more myself lately as well. And it took a lot of, I don't know, getting over fear of being judged in a certain light to show that broader, like full spectrum human.
Yeah. I do think it's fear. A lot of it is fear, and I think it's part of why now when I get on a stage and I look like this, it's also part of what I'm trying to do, right? Is to allow people to not be afraid. So I think what happens when I first get on stage and I look like this, people are like, I didn't know we had a magician coming, but then people go like, oh, I'm a little bit of a weirdo too. And you can be a weirdo, and that's all right, and so I feel like I have a bit of a mission now to is normalize weirdness. Does that even make sense? But yeah
Definitely. And clothing and expression is such an interesting space for that, right? Like when you were a kid, did anything inspire that outfit, or was it like completely spontaneous?
Yeah, I don't know if I can say. I think it was completely spontaneous. I was actually talking to a friend of mine, another speaker, recently about it, and something that folks can't tell looking at a video right now is I'm of remarkably short stature, right? I'm about 5'2" on a good day, and this friend of mine said, well, do you think maybe you dressed like that because you knew you would always stand out anyway, and so you wanted to kind of own the standing out? And she said this to me. I was, in my 40s at the time, and I was like, Oh yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Like that's probably a part of it, is just to say like there are aspects of ourselves that we have the way that we show up that we cannot control, and so I was sort of taking control of something, and I think that's definitely a part of the inspiration. I think another part of the inspiration is that I was always a music kid. Music has always been a very important part of my life, and so I just thought that the way that like musicians got to play with fashion and play with appearance was really interesting from a very young age because I grew up when music videos were just a thing. And so there was all kinds of weirdness happening visually, and I loved that. So I kind of wanted to be that.
Liberating.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Part of this point of this show. So, all right. So Eryc and I talked before, and this visual came up that we really wanted to jam on a little bit. Because I think a lot of us multi-passionate, as what we're talking about, creatives, kind of have, like the well of ideas are pretty much endless, right? Even when you're so-called blocked, something's gonna come through. And then the things that we act on maybe throughout life, the way that we do that changes, and we go through different, butterfly stages of things. But the visual was kind of like the land of forgotten ideas, and like, where do they go? And is it okay that we let go? Like, how do we let go of them? Which ones do we hold on to?
Yeah. I think a lot of creatives can relate to this idea of just like sort of more ideas than you can actually follow through. And I have a couple of thoughts about it. One of the thoughts that I have is sort of this has to do with intellectual property. So I'm going to talk about that for a second. I also want to talk about sort of just starting things and not finishing them. But I've been thinking about intellectual property. So I just published my first book, right? And of course, I get a lot of coaching that I should, make sure you get the copyright protected and make sure people aren't stealing your stuff and all that kind of thing. And I get that as a speaker too, like you should trademark all your catchphrases and, all of your frameworks and all that kind of stuff. And I find myself a little resistant to that. And I think there's two things. One is I feel like I am blessed with ideas and the ability to really connect dots. And, part of what the book does, which is about workplace culture, is really try to connect dots of a lot of different disciplines and ways of thinking. And I feel like I'll always have more. So I'd rather that the ideas spread than that I hoard them and protect them. So there's a little bit of an anti-capitalist sort of message in there, I think, which is just that like, I don't know that intellectual property is something that I'm totally on board with as an idea. So I think just set the ideas free, and they have a greater impact than when you try to sort of, keep them to yourself and protect them. So that's something I've been thinking about a lot. Does that resonate for you at all?
Yeah, totally. Unless it's like I think there's probably the exceptions, like some nuanced scientific breakthrough or potentially, but even then, you could argue both sides.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish about it, like I need to, make money and live indoors and eat food and stuff like that. I do need those things. And so I don't mean to say like money means nothing to me, but I think this idea of sort of clutching things too tightly, is kind of what I'm thinking about with that perspective.
I think it shows a great deal of self-trust, essentially.
And there might be a day that I live to regret it, right? There might, there's this narrative which I don't believe, that we get sort of less creative as we get older, and I don't believe that that's true at all. But there may be a time when I go like, I'm out of ideas. I wish I'd been more, I wish I'd leveraged them more or whatever. But yeah, I think I trust that they keep coming.
I have had a lot of conversations with folks that feel like they're being copied by their IP. And this is not a thing that bothers me, because to me, it's a compliment. I've also had that chat with my kids when they wear the cool outfit and then everyone goes and buys the cool thing.
Yes.
Like it's the highest form of flattery.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, like, I have this framework, and it's in my book. It's these 6 E's of cultivating human-centric workplaces. And I talk about it on stages, and it's really, a keystone piece of my content. And I was recently a judge for an awards program. And I was judging entries, and one of these entries mentioned following the 6 E's, and it was walked through my framework. They did not know I was a judge. That was not, yeah, and I was absolutely delighted. That was a huge moment for me to feel like, oh, okay, I'm making the impact I want to make. That's how you know. And then so yeah, so I think it's also I think it's not unlike parenting, where you could try to sort of mold your children into being just the thing that you think they should be, and you'll get a certain set of results that way. But if you also sort of set them free to become who they're going to become, and you create the conditions in which they can thrive and do that safely, then they're going to outstrip any possibilities that you might have thought of. At least that's my sort of thinking. So I think the ideas are like children in that way. But the other thing that you and I talked about was this problem that at least I have, and a fair number of my creative friends have, is being starters and not finishers of things. And I definitely have started a lot of things that I didn't finish. I have definitely started things that took me way longer to finish than they maybe should have. And I think that there's a blessing and a curse in that. And I think some of it, I think about figuring out the things that are okay to let go of is really the discipline, right? Figuring out the things that like maybe just don't need to be finished. Maybe that was an idea that was helping you on your way to another idea or another project or another, I don't know, performance that was just transitional. And I think maybe I'm telling myself that story to make me feel better, but I think there is an element of I follow this guy, Patrick McGinnis. Do you know him at all, Ariel? Patrick McGinnis is the guy who invented the term FOMO. He literally invented the term as an MBA student. And he was talking about it in that initial context. He was talking about the necessity of entrepreneurs to miss out on certain things. You can't do all the things and move anything forward. you just can't. And so I follow Patrick McGinnis, and I recommend him. And he talks about this idea of, he kicks off every podcast with a question, which is, what's the thing that you had to say no to in order to get to where you are today, right? And I think of it as like, what's the graveyard of ideas that you had to leave behind in order to cultivate a garden of other ideas, right? That are flourishing. And I think that's how I think about it now. There's so many things I could do, and maybe I'm not the person to do them. And so I think a lot about planting seeds. A lot of my metaphors are gardening related lately. But I think about planting seeds, right? Like I have an idea that I really want to do a hip hop cipher in my city. And I don't have the time for that. And I'm really trying to focus on some other things. And so I just try to talk to as many people as I can about that idea. And find the person who's like, oh yeah, I want to do that. And then I let them do that.
Yeah. I think it's taken me a lot of laps around the sun, but I have realized because of some of my creative ways, I tend to tap into other people's stuff and not know that it is. So I'll come up with some idea that I think is mine, and then someone else is talking about the same exact thing, and I'm like, oh, that was yours. Okay, I'll let that go.
Yeah. Well, that is a thing too, which is the notion of, I think it comes back to the notion of ownership a little bit, but ideas sort of come into more of a collective consciousness, I think, in a zeitgeisty kind of way. I find lately I've been having a ton of conversations with people about forming intentional communities for us as we age, where we can support each other and not be isolated and alone. And it just seems to be coming up in every conversation I have with people approximately my age now. Not everyone, but a lot of people. And so I think there are ideas that sort of come up into the world that way. I think about this in music all the time. There's been some very high profile lawsuits lately in music in the past 5-10 years, where it's gone from, you can't steal someone else's song, but to the point of you can't steal the vibe of someone's song. And
or their identity on AI, like
that's a whole other complication for sure. But the vibe thing I do want to talk about, because that's like it's like how the song feels, and it's absurd to think that you wouldn't be influenced by all of the other music that you've heard, or maybe even want to pay tribute to a song that you deeply love by capturing the vibe of it. And so when we get into these sort of litigious situations over this kind of stuff, I think about sometimes people have the same idea at the same time. Or sometimes they come to the idea and, don't even know the reference point that people are accusing them of ripping off. I remember early on, I was a music journalist for a bunch of years. I wrote about music, and I remember writing a record review. It's probably 20 years ago now. This guy named Dennis Whitmer, singer-songwriter. I'm saying his name because I recommend people check him out. But Dennis Whitmer, I wrote about one of his early records, and I compared it to a Jackson Browne record from the 70s. And I said a lot of other things about it. I didn't just compare it to Jackson Browne, but Dennis Whitmer then reached out to me and said, "Oh, loved your review. I feel like you really get my music. And also, I'm checking out that Jackson Browne record that you mentioned because I've never heard it." And to me, it was such an obvious touchstone. And it was just in the air somehow.
Yeah, I've definitely done some deep contemplation on this idea of like uniqueness in expression, and whether it matters. And I guess the conclusion that I've come to is it's probably doesn't matter. Like there's an echo, I guess is what I'm going to say. Copying in the and people can feel the echo.
Ooh.
And they know.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's true. I've been contemplating the same thing. I've been contemplating originality, right, as a concept, and also learning that different cultures have different concepts of originality, which I find really interesting. And so, again, for me, the touchstone is music, but dub and dance hall music out of Jamaica and the West Indies, they used the term original to mean the exact opposite of the way that we use it. When they said original, they would mean like a thing I've heard before. And the way that showed up in music is specifically they use rhythms in this music, RIDDIM, but it's basically the whole instrumental track. So I would take the whole instrumental track from your record, and I love it so much, and I write a whole new melody and lyrics on top of it, and I record it and I release it. And that is a very normalized practice in that genre. And it's really just this notion. It's this notion of acknowledging your roots and acknowledging your influences and paying tribute, paying homage to things that have come before, and amplifying them even. Because people tend to refer to the rhythm by its name, and it's usually the name of the first record it was ever on. People will say like, it's my song, but it's on this rhythm, and it just gets recycled and repurposed. And blues is the same way. There's the standard blues form is 12 bars and a handful of chords, and we can make infinite songs out of that. And are they original? I don't know. It depends on how we define that, right?
I love that though, this idea. I think that does change things as a really in this whole topic, it's really just an invitation to cite, to pay tribute to like acknowledge the influence in the heritage, which is not always as common in our Western culture, potentially, because our culture doesn't encourage that mindset as much, I think. There's this individuality lie
Yes.
that we have going on
Yes.
here.
Yeah. And that's a huge part of it, right? This, the tension between uh, the extraordinary individual and the fact that nobody actually achieves anything alone, right? Of note, that there's this radical interdependence that enables us, right? So yeah, I think you're exactly on it. I really struggled with this when I was writing my book, actually, because typically in a business book, you've got footnotes, you're always citing research and citing sources. And I find that, and maybe this is just part of how my brain works, but I consume a ton of content. I am always learning. I am always self-educating. And I don't always know where the ideas came from at some point that they've sort of become integrated into me. And so when I was writing the book, I was really struggling with this desire to give credit to all the folks, at least the folks I can think of, who have influenced my thinking and whose ideas are somehow in the book, and not wanting to make a book that was dry and researchy. I wanted it to be highly readable, and so what I ended up doing is I have almost no footnotes, maybe zero footnotes. I might have zero footnotes. I can't remember. Pretty sure I might have zero footnotes. I don't have any endnotes. I don't have a bibliography to speak of, but I have at the back of the book a number of books, articles, and people who I feel like have influenced me. And of course, I have the standard sort of standard. I have a list of sort of gratitude, thanks, at the back of the book as well. And it's really my attempt to acknowledge that while as a speaker, I'm encouraged to be like a brand, and it's like Eryc Eyl, I'm all the things. I'm like, no, absolutely not. There's no way that I could be thinking the things I'm thinking, that I could finish a book without a whole bunch of people, some of whom have no idea they even played a part. So trying to really acknowledge that interdependence and say that that's still creativity. Creativity does not have to be individuality. I don't think those things are necessarily the same.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I'm gonna bring it back to the book as an example. Yeah. That was one of your projects that made it through into the world.
Yeah.
How come that one, and why not others?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, it was against all freaking odds that it got finished. There were many reasons why it shouldn't have been finished. I started off writing the book in 2019, and it was a slow going, and I'd written tens of thousands of words. And at the end of 2019, I was traveling. I was out of the country, and I realized, like, I can't do this. I'm never going to finish this. I'm trying to write the book of all the things I've ever thought and known about how organizational culture works. I need to write a book. So not the book, but a book, right? So I literally just like stopped writing, outlined a new book that I knew would be short, that people would actually read, and started writing that. And I started writing it while I was traveling. So I'm writing on my laptop on trains and stuff, and wrote tens of thousands of words, got back to the States, beginning of 2020, COVID happened. My wife and I were actually on a road trip, long story, during COVID, and the car got broken into and the laptop got stolen and I hadn't backed anything up. And so all of those tens of thousands of words disappeared. So that's another point at which I could have completely given up and not pushed this forward. And in fact, I didn't do anything for months, to be real with you. Like, I probably put it on hold for 6-7 months of nothing. And
simmering. It was simmering.
And that's I think what it is that I was giving talks on the topic. I was working with clients and sort of coaching and consulting and advising on the topic of workplace culture and leadership. And so the ideas were getting better. The ideas were getting stronger. The ideas were getting more complex. And I felt like I needed to finish a book because I wanted to set the ideas free, I guess, in a way, right? I wanted people, not just people who are in audiences when I give talks, to get these ideas and do something with them. But I felt like this could actually be of help to people. And so I think I need to finish this. And I pretty much gave up on the notion of this being a vanity project. Like I didn't feel like I need to be able to say I wrote a book. Like that's not important to me. But getting the ideas out there was really important to me. So I picked it back up and wrote a first draft in 7 focused days. Just from blank page to finished draft in 7 days. And for the creatives out there, I mean, my discipline was I blocked the time. So that was all I was doing during those 7 days. We have an RV in our backyard. I went to that RV every day and worked in that RV. I also knew that I gave myself permission to screw around during that time. Like I didn't, I think there was only one thing I was responsible for, which was getting this draft done. But that also meant that I, wasted plenty of time, like a normal person. But I also, just coming back to the sort of creative discipline piece of it, I said, I'm going to write. I'm not going to research. I'm not going to edit. I'm just going to write. So I didn't give myself any reasons to sort of labor over the text at that point. Right? The goal was get it done. I forget which writer talks about the idea of the shitty first draft, but that was the idea. Is it Anne? Yeah, that makes sense. So got that done. But then again, I keep hitting, I think about the war of art, right? I kept hitting points of resistance. I handed the book over to an editor who was amazing, gave me tons of incredible feedback, asked me tons of great questions. I got back this marked up draft. I didn't know what the heck to do with it. I had no idea what to do with it. Actually, my impulse was, okay, well, I'm going to start over. That was my actual impulse. Scrap it all, start over, because it's easier for me to start than it is to labor through that messy middle part. And so I put it aside again. And that might have been close to a year, honestly, that I did nothing with it. And finally, again, had to block the time. And in a couple of days, went through page by page. And again, my ideas had evolved, and the book is better for all of that time.
I would say editing too. Editing is a different energy, like super different person that you're creating.
Absolutely. I'm curious. Do you find that with photography as well? Do you find that like the edit of in photography, is that a different mindset?
Well, the type of photography that I'm doing right now, like I'm doing really focused around softness and soul essence and intimate connection. And so when I'm editing, it just I feel like I'm still in that energy.
Okay. Interesting. So it's part of the flow. It's part of the creation process.
Like
Yeah. I do think it's a for as a writer, certainly I feel that editing is a whole different brain. It's a whole other sort of humbling experience, I think, in some ways. And
it's kind of like the metaphor I like to use about the artist versus the designer.
Oh, yes.
The artist is the flow, and the designer is like, where is one little dot out, across the T?
Absolutely. That's so good. And that sometimes doesn't exist in the same person. Like it just, again, back to interdependence. Like sometimes it just doesn't exist in the same person. I should also say about the why did I finish this project. I think I also started to set some external accountability, which I'm sort of embarrassed to admit how much it matters to me, but it does. So just talking about the book publicly, talking about the fact that I had this book coming out, that I was working on, working on this book, that I had a book coming out, all of these things sort of, I felt like, I guess I better do this because I said I was going to, like, a lot of people actually know at this point. So there was some of that too, of just like,
that's wonderful.
Yeah, we do need it. We absolutely need it. Yeah. But I think the thing that I found too is that, like, I brought an illustrator on board for the book. I talked to these people who like ghostwrite business books, and they introduced me to these like fancy business book illustrators and stuff. And their work was amazing, but it was not my book. I wanted organic. I wanted the feel of humanity in my book. And I had met this woman online over pandemic times who does these sketch notes. She does not consider herself an artist. She does not consider herself an illustrator. She doesn't really consider herself a creative. She runs a business, a company based in South Africa. And I went to her and said, I really want you to illustrate these sometimes complicated intellectual concepts. And working with her throughout the process also helped me feel all the more inspired to finish the book, because I really wanted to see her work with my words, and I wanted to see that come together. So that collaboration, was a big part of what kept me moving forward when I might not otherwise have seen it through.
Yeah, I've participated in collaborative authorship books, and I find that to be really neat in that way.
I don't really know how that works. What does that look like?
Well, the ones that I've done, some central person is organizing and initiating it and giving the prompt, like the general focus. So I've been in like creativity coaching books, and creativity coaches all contributing their specific thing based on that prompt.
I love that. That's cool.
Yeah, that's an example. And I just think it's neat because you do kind of get inspired by each other. The work is less, right? Just all the great things about collaboration.
Yes. Many hands light work, right? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And everyone, when you amplify voices,
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and something, and I think I mentioned this to you before we recorded, but I've started using in my work in organizations, I've started using this model called Working Genius, which is this sort of personality assessment created by the Table Group, which is Patrick Lencioni, who wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Team and that kind of thing. And he has this assessment that he started selling in, 2020, 2021, not long ago. But it plots people as sort of starters and finishers in a way, but it acknowledges that there are sort of 6 kind of gifts that we need to get anything of import done. And it sort of goes also in chronology. So at the beginning, there's wonder and ideation, which some of us are good at, and not necessarily both. Like, we're not necessarily, somebody might be good at wonder, but not at ideation. Right? The wonder is like, how could this be better? And then the ideation is, here's some ways, right? And then he has discernment, which is, okay, from all the things that we could do, what's the thing that we should do? Discernment. Yeah, the narrower, exactly, yeah. Then there's the galvanizer, the person who kind of gets people excited about it and gets people on board. Galvanizing. I don't remember what the E stands for, but I'm going to say enablement. But it's basically, let's organize a team to do this. Let's make sure we have the tools. Let's have a plan. All of that kind of stuff. And then there's the last one is, he calls it tenacity, but it's really the finisher, the person who makes sure that things get done and that we see it through to completion. And so these 6 things, what I love about his model is that, like, we've all got a little bit of it. And the model says you've got probably 2 that are dominant. for you. And for the rest, you need other people. you need collaboration. You need to lean on other people. And I think that that lesson for me at least has been really super valuable. And when I use it in organizations, it's a way of saying that all of those things are valuable, and that the absence of one of those things is not a deficit that you must fix. And I think for me personally, to get into my own sort of psychology of it, I think for a long time I was really like ashamed of being a starter and not so much a finisher. I saw that as a weakness in myself that needed to be fixed. And instead to say like, yeah, there's plenty of people who aren't great starters, so help them get started. So yeah.
Feeling strength.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's something I want to distill out from as well from your story around the book, which I think was really important, is, and in particularly in organizational change and things like this too. Whereas is like we and I do a lot of visioning work. It's like my main thing, right? And so it's so easy for me to have the idea start this size and then go the whole entire like save the universe planet, yes, biggest thing possible, which is not common. I've learned not everyone does that. It's actually
right.
And so then the trick is, and that kind of what I heard you say you did with your book, right? Like it was like, woo, whole universe. And then you thought to yourself, well, that's not going to actually birth into the world. Yeah. So then I think that's super interesting, is letting go of that. You can still see it, right? Like you still see it. It doesn't have to go anywhere, but you're saying like, what's the first iteration or the first thing? And then allowing space as well for the magic of stuff you couldn't see, if you can just first thing to come through actually into reality.
Yes. I love that. Well, and I think I learned from watching, I see this a lot in filmmakers. Film is another thing that I really pay a lot of close attention to. And I think you can see filmmakers who across 6 different movies are articulating their vision, right? Like each movie stands on its own, has its own storyline, but you can see that there is an unfolding of a whole worldview that is happening. I think Yorgos Lanthimos, who directed Poor Things, which is out right now, is one of those directors. When you look at his films, you can see like, okay, his first film, he didn't say it all, and he couldn't say it all, but he finished the freaking movie, and that movie is out, and we can love it. And so I think we see that with filmmakers, and I think for all of us, sort of as creatives, I think that's a piece of it too. It's the oeuvre, right? It's the body of work. It's not any individual work. That is our expression.
Amazing. All right. So to wrap it up here for today, what's next for you? What creative thing is emerging?
Gosh, well, I'm trying to embrace the launch of this book as a creative act in itself. And that's been actually really fun for me, because I'm not a person who likes to self-promote. I'm not a person who likes to say, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. I like to be looked at. Don't get me wrong, of course, but I don't like to sort of, be out there sort of hawking all the time. And so I think right now, this book, Stop Engaging Employees, like I do want its reach to be big. I want its impact to be big. And so how can I do that in ways that for me have integrity and are fun? And so that has involved videos and writing and conversations like this one, that I feel like are you can turn it into a creative act, and I think for so many folks, like the completion of the book is it, but like what I've learned from music, if a band makes a record and they put, I know, old language, if a band makes a record that they put out into the world,
they're hip now.
yeah, right. Then then it can just fall flat after that short sort of initial peak, when there's so much more value to be. I don't mean value in a capitalist sense. I mean sort of, soul value to be gleaned from that work of art. And how can we find other ways to keep that going? So for me, partly it's the launch of the book, and then it's the keynotes and workshops and programs that I'm trying to put together that are based on this book. That I'm looking forward to sort of cracking open and reevaluating, and turning them into experiences for audiences, as opposed to just me giving a talk, and really looking at ways that can be a shared experience and not a static experience. So those are some of the things that I have in mind. I do want to get back to this play that I wrote during the pandemic. It's not done. It got a staged reading. It got a real staged reading with real actors and a director and all of that, but it was half done. It needs more love. And I look forward to sort of turning my attention back to that play and giving it what it deserves.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so I just want to kind of emphasize this idea of because I've heard this before, and I think it's an issue even for me with my own art. It's like, well, I already showed this. Do I have to keep showing it?
Yeah.
Yes, like over and over and over. And finding the energy to make that experience really fun. I think that metaphor of like the musician and creating the energy with it, creating the multidimensional experience, not just the object or the thing that you created, but what is this experience around it? It's really neat.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for this chat today. I so appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, thank you. This is so much fun. So much fun to chat with you.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.